It's, uh, Hello everyone, welcome to our broadcast live on air tonight. We're talking about religious education and why it matters, and we've got three marvellous panellists from very diverse backgrounds this evening. So I'd like them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask Jocelyn Armstrong if you'd like to say a few words about yourself and where you're coming from in this topic, Jocelyn.
Thank you, David. I'm a retired school teacher and teaching religious studies in a Christian school in Auckland. I developed a curriculum that introduced the students to religions other than Christianity. We were a church school, so Christianity remained the base, but we introduced other religions, other world religions to the students. So when I retired a couple of years ago, Pearson Publishers asked me to write a textbook for New Zealand schools, and I can talk a little bit more about that when it's time.
Yes, that would be great, Jocelyn. I became aware of that textbook, and it's a marvellous textbook. I'm going to ask Jocelyn towards the end of our broadcast if she would sort of hold it up and show, because it really is a beautifully written, beautifully produced text. So thanks for that background. Jim, how about yourself?
Hi, I'm Jim Pearson, and I've been doing some work here in night school and with David Bell for I don't know a year or so now, David. Anyway, yeah, I did my Master of Theology last year. I finished up at Laidlaw College, which is it's in West Auckland. My focus was on Bishop Berggrav of Norway, who was the spiritual leader during the Second World War. I studied his resistance theology basically, but also I compared him with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's much more well known from Germany. And then I had the privilege of doing a series on war and peace in the 20th century that was here on Night School earlier this year. Besides the World War II theme, there was World War I. The Korean War. There was a presentation on George Armstrong, who I had the privilege of interviewing a couple of years ago for another essay during my master's, and then I finished up with the War on Terror, and so I guess there's been a bit of a resistance theme going on.
Thank you. That's great, and I should mention too that Jim's a teacher, teaches English as a second language, and has got an interest in education too. So that's one of the reasons why
yes.
I've got him.
Yeah. Oh yes, I've taught English and church history. So yeah, ongoing interest.
Great. Now, the last of our participants is Simon Williams, who originally comes from South Africa, but I think has been in New Zealand. Well, I think I've known you since about 2011 or 10. I can't remember, Simon, but you've been around a long time. Like to tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Simon Williams. I'm a teacher at Onehunga High School. I teach maths, and I came to New Zealand in 2008 with my family. I'm currently studying as a student at the Methodist College and I'm trying to get my qualifications to be a Methodist presbyter.
And I don't think you'll have any trouble whatsoever getting them, Simon. It's a real privilege to have been associated with you in the past in the college. Well, without any further ado, I'm going to share now some words that Jocelyn sent in, and I'll just present this to everyone so that you can all see. Jocelyn's given a kind of a background summary to the New Zealand situation with regard to religious education. And she said that in our society that's become multicultural and multi-religious so rapidly over the past couple of decades, she's noted some things. Different religions could possibly inspire fear and suspicion if they remain as unknown or misunderstood. This could lead to bullying. Jocelyn says that learning about religions, however, can give students and teachers and those with a religious faith and those without the ability to recognise and affirm each other's religious commitments with respect. Now tell us a little bit more about that, please, Jocelyn. In your work as a teacher, was it always the case that religion was taught in the schools that you taught at, or did you have to fight to get recognition of religious education?
Oh, I was in a church school, so church schools are schools of special character in New Zealand, and because of their special character, they can teach religious studies. But it is quite different in New Zealand public schools, in our secondary schools. There's no history at all of teaching about religions. It goes way back to the Secular Act, early in New Zealand's history, 1877, when the government took on the support of education in the country. The churches had started it in the very early days. When the government took over, because the churches could no longer pay for it, there was so much discussion amongst the churches as to how it should happen, and there was a bit of quarrelling, etc. So the primary schools at that time were stated in law that they needed to be free, secular, and no religion in them at all. Free and compulsory and secular. And that somehow carried over into secondary schools when secondary schools came about in our country. So that's the background.
Is that still the case, that the schools have to be secular in their approach in New Zealand?
In the primary schools, yes, the law still stands, but not public, not secondary schools. Secondary schools are not bound by that, as far as I know. So that secondary schools at the moment, there's a social studies curriculum, and in that social studies curriculum, the students are asked to study the impact of intercultural activity on a society. And teachers can choose to look at that interaction through religion, and that's where my textbook came in. It's a social studies textbook.
Right.
But public schools, the secondary schools, and the teachers themselves have no training in teaching about religions in schools, in our secondary schools.
Okay, Simon, what's the situation, or what was the situation in South Africa? Was there any teaching of religions in primary and secondary schools when you were there?
Well, when I went to school, the teaching of Bible study and Christian studies was allowed, but before I left South Africa, that was taken out of school altogether, and students were given a subject called life orientation, and then as a small part of it, they were taught about all different religions of the world, to give them a broader view.
And sorry, that was in the secondary school sector, or
yes,
the primary school?
That was secondary school as well as primary school.
Right. Oh, okay. So that kind of mirrors your approach, Jocelyn. That you've been teaching about all religions?
Yes, I am very keen for New Zealand schools to teach about religions and all the world religions, because since the immigration law changed immigration patterns in this country in 1987, it has rapidly become multicultural. And because of that, we need to know one another's religions in order to be comfortable with one another, especially in our schools, to build a more harmonious society as we would have it.
Right. Now, let's switch our attention over to America, because America has a totally different kind of, well, it's almost like, as far as I can see, Jim, it's kind of a split personality approach to the teaching of religion in schools. Would you like to explain, I might have that completely wrong, so would you like to explain at primary and secondary level, what happens with religious education? Oops, it looks like we've lost Jim right out of the picture. He's faded away. So he will come back in, and we'll pick it up in a slightly different way. While we're waiting for Jim to answer that, Jocelyn, I'm just going to bring the screen share back up again, because one of your comments is particularly relevant, and that is, you said there's got to be acceptance of one another's distinctive cultures, and religion helps build positive relationships and social harmony as we recognize the distinctive culture. You got any insights as to how that works? Like, when you teach about religion, how do you build a positive image of the culture?
Well, I see us tackling religions in the classroom when they are a obvious part of the students' lives. The New Zealand curriculum now says that our curriculum in our classrooms, it's built up by the teacher in the school according to the national guidelines. It needs to have meaning for the students. It needs to have some reference to their lives. And so if students in a classroom, say you've got a guy in a turban, say you've got some girls in a veil, say you've got some kids who don't have any religion at all, if they can understand one another, they will feel part of that classroom. And if the teacher can get them to talk about it, I can remember a little Indian girl at school giving us the mantra that she says each morning as she has her beginning of her day, and the kids were absolutely mesmerized. Now, if they can hear that from one another and understand one another, they'll have respect for one another instead of seeing them as something quite alien.
That's a fascinating comment. So it's actually building the respect for culture occurs amongst the children, not necessarily amongst the adults.
Well,
and therefore it's really important in the school, in the classroom.
Yeah, and I did talk to one social studies teacher who had been teaching about religions for several years. This is in a public state high school. And he was quite convinced that teaching about religions over several years had actually brought about a very positive, accepting, respectful atmosphere throughout the whole school. And he was quite sure of that. It was quite a startling comment that I really appreciated.
Simon, in your experience in the Onehunga High School situation, that would be highly multicultural, multi-ethnic?
Yes, we've got a big Pacifica population, and if you talk to them about religion, they are quite open to, and they speak about going to church and what they believe, and but there's a tolerance for each other's beliefs. I think from my from me talking to them, I think also, even if students don't believe, that there's enough space for them as well. Our motto at school is loyalty and courage. So we try and use that motto for the kids to understand that they should be loyal to each other, and they should have the courage and conviction of their hearts to be themselves. So I think that contributes a lot to students being quite comfortable with what they believe and where they come from.
And do you have Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, the varieties of religious culture in the Onehunga High School situation?
Yes, we do have. There's this one Muslim student that I can remember that I taught in year 12. I saw him again this year. He's year 30 now, and he had this massive beard. and we've got a rule at school that you're supposed to cut your beard. So I didn't know that he was a Muslim, and so I asked him about it, and he said he's got permission from the principal because he's a Muslim. He can't cut his beard. So that's that type of tolerance from SMT, from the students, and from the other teachers as well towards what people believe.
That's great.
Yeah, Jocelyn, do you have that? You taught in an Anglican church school?
Yes.
But you wouldn't have had just Anglican students in that.
No, I remember a couple of Muslim families. I remember the Indian families with a Hindu background, and the Jewish kids too. But talking of the Onehunga High School, for a couple of years now, the Auckland Interfaith Council has organised a day for Year 12 students. We've asked a selection or a variety of secondary schools in Auckland to send a busload, 10 or 12 students, towards the end of their Year 12 year, to have a day of diversity as part of leadership training for their last year at school. And the students were blown away. We had half a dozen teenagers talk to them from 6 different religions. 3 of them spoke about world peace, 3 of them spoke about the care of the environment. And from the perspective of 6 different religions, and the students, one of them said, I could relate to what they were saying from a teenage position. Hearing other students talk about their own religions is really helpful. And another student said, the religions have so much in common, I did not know that before. And then another student, and it is important for a leader to realize that people have different views and ideas. So, you know, I was quite impressed at the students were rapt in that day, sharing those 6 different religious points of view.
Wow.
How many people attended?
We had about
Jocelyn?
100. We had about 10 schools.
He's talking.
And,
He's there.
90 to 100 students, and their teachers came with them. So it was a good day, and it's a way of introducing how you can talk about religion in the classroom. I'm really keen to encourage it.
Simon, did you have any perspective on what Jocelyn's just said about encouraging the discussion? But she can do that from the kind of subject that she's teaching within the curriculum. Must be much harder for you teaching mathematics. How do you get about talking about religious faith, or is that permitted in a state secular school?
It's not permitted, David. So I can get into trouble if I do it just from the cuff. So I actually wait for students to make statements about faith and religion, and then I ask them questions about it, and so other students will then also join in on the discussion, and so the evidence that I started it will be like null and void. Students started the discussion, so I won't get into trouble with my boss. So to speak.
Right, I think that's a terribly important thing, isn't it, Jocelyn? Because the difference of the two systems is that within the confines of a religious school, you do all teachers have a bit more freedom, but within the confines of the state secular school, they've got a little less autonomy around this.
Yeah, but at the same time, in social studies, there is now that space where religions can become a subject in the classroom. If you're looking at cultures in New Zealand, how they're interacting, which is what Year 9 and 10 students are asked to look at, they can look at it through the religious point of view. So there is room there, but I do want to say that my textbook is shaped on the inquiry method of learning, so it's not pumping a whole lot of content at the kids. It's more a textbook that encourages discussion, encourages the questions, encourages the students. It gives them a bit of information as a stepping off point for their own inquiry and discussion.
Okay, Jim, you're back in the classroom now, and
Yep,
I'd like to just hear about the classroom. I'd just like to hear about the American perspective on this. Is religion compulsory in primary and secondary schools, or is it outlawed, or what is the story?
No, it's pretty much outlawed, David. I mean, even back when I was brought up in public schools, and I can remember in high school I had a I had a very outspoken English teacher, Mrs. Champion from Boston, and she was a devout Catholic and was very outspoken and would initiate those discussions and would push buttons, and she was often hauled into the principal's office.
Oh, look, looks like they're having some technical issues down at the Waiaki e-learning centre. I'm not broadcasting from there, so that's quite lucky. But what Jim said, okay, essentially religion in American high schools, I wasn't quite clear about primary, takes a secular approach like New Zealand. Now, Vaitamoni Suifanga from Hamilton has put a question up, and I wonder if I could read the question out, and then Jocelyn and Simon, if you could comment on it. Vaitamoni is asking, study of religion is crucial to secondary school students, but I wonder how we can forward a proposal to the government to consider our concerns. And I suspect, Jocelyn, this is right up your alley, isn't it? Proposals to government.
Yeah, I have had meetings with people related to the Ministry of Education when the book first came out. But recently I've talked to one or two principals, and they're quite keen for us to meet and discuss this and put something in front of the ministry. And I've talked again with other educators, and they feel that the time might well be right now. It's 30 years since we've become, over the last 30 years, we've become this multicultural, multi-religious society, and if we want to remain a cohesive, tolerant society, I think that we need to take this on in our schools. So I would encourage people to write to the ministry, to talk to the principals of schools that they know, and see if we can get somewhere with it.
That's a great answer. I'm all in favour of continually keeping the issue before the politicians. I think Vaitamoni is on target here, that if we say nothing, they will assume that there is no particular issue or problem. Simon, you're back in, Jim, so just directing back through to us. No. We're looking, oops, it looks like you've got a slight problem there, so you just mute that for the time being. Simon, how about from your perspective, how would you deal with Vaitamoni's proposal? Would you think, as a prospective Methodist minister, as one in training, would you see it as your responsibility as a presbyter to start talking to your local MP about things like religious education?
Well, I think as a social agent for change, as a presbyter, what we could do is maybe start a petition among our own congregation, and maybe throw it open on a Facebook page, on a blog, somewhere for whoever wants to sign the petition, and then maybe write a letter to the effect that we want religious studies, not just Christian studies, but religious studies, so that people learn from each other's religion, and maybe move the government in that way to change the law as it stands at present.
Okay, I particularly like the idea that you would use the social media to start getting the message out. And I'd make the suggestion that, this goes to Vaitamoni as well as to you, Simon, that use the existing things that have already been written and talked about. So, Jocelyn, can I bring your information back up on screen? And it's just at the top of the screen. You've said that the New Zealand national curriculum is based on the principle that effective learning takes place when students' identities and backgrounds are recognised and affirmed. So there's the entree, isn't it? If you're the Methodist minister in a multicultural situation, you will be aware of all these personal identities, group identities, and so on. And it's not a case of going to the government and saying, oh, you've got to teach, Hinduism, you've got to teach, but rather here are people's identities, young people's identities that we want to value, nurture, affirm, etc. Do you see that as the entree, Jocelyn?
Yes. And even more, the national curriculum, which I have here, I don't know whether you can see it there, it states that all levels of the curriculum should reflect New Zealand's cultural diversity and value the histories and traditions of all its peoples. Now, you can't learn about the histories and traditions of all our peoples without looking at their religions in a great deal of ways. So the national curriculum gives us our basis to go to the ministry.
Yeah. Does that sort of help you, Simon, in the sense that using the actual curriculum and using the fact that some people have already been talking about this, it actually makes the work of a Methodist or an Anglican or a Presbyterian or a Pentecostal minister a lot easier because it's an agreed standard for the Ministry of Education. Any comments, Simon?
Yes, I agree with you, David, on that one, because that gives us enough evidence that it is in writing already, it exists, so we don't have to invent the wheel. The wheel is there already for us just to use.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've done answering Veitamoni's question. So, Jim, I'm going to come back to you and just ask you to explain a little bit more. America is constantly pumping out the idea that it's a Christian country, all shades of Christianity in America. But in reality...
Yeah, I've got a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other, David.
Absolutely.
that does make for a bit of a trouble, doesn't it? What's your opinion about how effective schools are at dealing with respect for different religious practices in the American context?
Okay, now, yeah, I think the last time just before I was cut off, when I was in high school, I took a world history class, and all the religions were covered. But I remember our teacher was definitely a bit of bias towards Christianity, although other ones were covered. And it's about the same. I talked to my sister this afternoon, and she's a trained teacher, and she's teaching a children's Bible club after school. And so that's called Kids Bible Clubs, and that's there in Western Michigan, and that's okay. But no, it continues to not be allowed in the public school curriculum at all. I mean, as far as teaching Christianity or the Bible, but different religions are taught, so Christianity will undoubtedly come up, but there also be this other palette of religions. And so, yeah, so I mean, in that sense, the Christian views are on the back foot. But I mean, it's still being presented, but it's in the context of these other religions. So I guess it may be similar to maybe what's going on in other countries in the West.
I'm very interested when you use the term, religions are on the back foot. In some ways, that's a really good place to be, isn't it? That that forces us to have to explain ourselves a little better. And as Christians explaining themselves, then Muslims explain themselves, Jews explain themselves, Hindu explain themselves, and we end up with a situation where a more genuine dialogue can emerge than if one group
I agree.
is at the top. And I think this has come up quite a bit in another discussion forum that I'm involved in, looking at the influx of refugees out of, I mean in the worldwide context, the refugees coming out of the Middle East, and the kinds of societies from which they are fleeing. They're ruled basically by theocracies. That they're ruled by dictators who aren't always benevolent. So to be able to come to a society or a culture where you explain yourself, but you don't automatically have precedence over someone else, I think is a really important kind of human rights step. There's another question I'm just going to read out. Vaitamoni has come through. He said, thank you, the answer is very helpful, and he believes it's about time to introduce this wonderful subject to help our youth. So thank you for that one, Vaitamoni. And I'm just selecting a question from Stuart Mannins now, and he says there's been no mention so far about how I perceive religious instruction in public schools when I was a student in Auckland, viz. And he's talking about the Bible in schools, and the primary and Crusaders and the secondary. So it's so different. Stuart's saying that when he went to school, which was probably back in the time of Noah and the Ark, back in that time, it really was a Christian context, and the Crusaders movement, the Bible in schools movement, very, very strong. But that's no longer the case, is it? I wonder, Simon, you might be able to comment on that, and then Jocelyn.
To be honest, I have no idea what Stuart is talking about, because I only came to New Zealand in 2008. But I think a fresh perspective would be, if we talk about Christianity, that maybe we should think about looking at it from a specific point of view, where we incorporate how we interpret the Bible and how we interpret the scriptures from the islanders' perspective, from the Maori perspective, and incorporate or include that to how the so-called Palangi looks at the Bible and interprets it, so that people will have a balanced view of what Christianity is about for people in New Zealand.
For people in the Pacifica context, yeah. Yes. Because there are very different readings in that sense. Jocelyn, would you like to comment on Stuart Mannins' historical shift of perspective, that, you know, things like Bible in schools and so on?
Simon has just brought up a very good point, because we tend, when we talk about religions that are other than our own, we talk about an idealistic picture of that religion instead of showing the variety within each religion. And Simon's brought up that variety in Christianity, you know, the different theological understandings that we have. Well, the same is true of every one of the religions. I mean, we see it in Islam, we see it in Hinduism. So it's a very important point somehow to get across to people that there's that variation of belief and understanding in each of the religions. But going back to the other one, New Zealand, of course, was British and Christian dominance. Christian British immigration was dominant for 150 years, and then all of a sudden we're multicultural. And so it's taking a while, but I think we do need to look at the Bible in Schools program, which is half an hour outside the classroom, outside the school timetable, half an hour a week. It was brought in so early on in order to cope with that Christian context. But now it's no longer like that, and we need now to look at all religions so that everyone is catered for in the classroom, that everyone can feel comfortable at school. And I think we also need professional teachers. Up till now, it's all been volunteers in the classroom with Bible in schools and the others. So now we need it to go into the training colleges for teachers. We need to teach teachers how to cope with the teaching about religions in the classroom.
Okay, I think that's a fair answer, and I think that pretty well covers Stuart's question from both perspectives. While you were giving that answer, Jocelyn, an idea came to my head that whilst totally affirming what you and Simon have said about the variety within the Christian religion or the variety within Hindu, etc., the reality is, for the vast majority of New Zealanders now, none of these religions have any particular significance. I think the fastest growing religious movement in New Zealand for the last three censuses, has been that group that say we don't care to state that we've got a religious view. And so what I've been beginning to unpack for myself at my late stage of development is actually my views about the Bible, my views about Christianity, they no longer connect with the spiritual realities that people in the wider society are talking about. And I wonder whether, in fact, we should be moving right away from the teaching of all of these things to simply teaching about spiritual experience that has been located here in this context. It could be Tonga, here in this context it could be Maori, spirituality here in this context, which could be European or British or South African or American. Jim, have you got any perspective on that? Do you see a movement towards no religion as one of the growing spiritual points?
Oh, I hadn't thought much about that. I agree with what the others have been saying about the need for teaching all the religions so that the children feel comfortable and affirmed, and that their backgrounds are But I can understand what you're saying. I was reading today about the gentleman in Red Beach who was taking he was taking this school to court, and the district attorney McClintock, I think his name was, because he felt his daughter was coerced into going into Bible in schools. So I don't think he was trying to outlaw it altogether, but I think it was some of the tactics and strategies that were involved in getting his daughter to that instruction. But no, I'd be all for the continued instruction of all religions, and I like the comment that Jocelyn, one of the year 12, said that we all, he or she couldn't believe how much we all have in common. So I think it's finding that shared humanity in our common human experience. But I would be for the different religions, but also for what you're saying, David, the different spiritual expressions, which even Native Indian from America and these kinds of things being taught and analyzed. Right.
Jocelyn, I'd like to, I'm aware that we've now come to 7:37, so we're very close to finishing. I'm highlighting your screen, so you're now sort of center stage, and I wonder if you could hold up that marvelous book you wrote and tell us a little bit about this.
Well, and as I show it to you, I'll say I went to an international conference looking at spirituality and motivating students' spirituality. And I see something like this course of looking at religions. Say this book looks at Christianity through Christmas and Easter, the public holidays in New Zealand. you introduce it, and then you delve deep, and it allows the students to kind of, once they've delved deep into something quite central to that religion, they can then sense something of the mystery, something of the beauty, and it encourages the spirituality at the same time as learning some factual stuff about the religions. So this is that book.
Yeah, and it's a beautifully presented and beautifully written book.
Gil Hanley took all the photos. I was determined to have all New Zealand photos. So Gil Hanley, one of our top photographers in the country, took the photos with me.
Right. Yeah, we couldn't quite see that so well, but...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know how this...
No, don't worry about it. It is, as I say, it's a very, very handsome book. There's no question of that. And I wondered, Jocelyn, whether it might also have a place in churches, so that if a church youth group or a sort of senior Sunday school, and if you had a couple of skilled teachers, would they be able to take a book like that from the New Zealand Social Studies curriculum and use it as the basis of youth instruction within a church?
Oh, absolutely. I've sold many a copy to grandparents for their grandchildren. I've sold it to people such as the ones you're speaking of for groups to use. It's it's based on discussion groups. There's lots of questions there for the kids to tease out, as well as the photographs and the information.
Okay. Simon and Jim, have you got any questions you'd like to direct at this late stage to Jocelyn directly? We've just got about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then we'll come to the end of the broadcast. So anything you want to ask Jocelyn about teaching in churches or in schools?
Just one question, Jocelyn. Where would I get that book?
I can send you a copy because I buy them from but it is Pearson's. It's a Pearson textbook. So if you go to the Pearson publisher, it's pearsoned.co.z.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Simon, you're actually a poor theological student, so we will get some churches to sponsor a copy for you. How about that?
Oh, thanks, David.
Jim, did you have any question that you would like to put to Jocelyn?
Oh, well, I was going to ask a similar question, but Jocelyn's answered it. No, I'd be interested in getting a couple of copies for a couple of churches I'm doing some work in at the moment. So I think it would be good for schools or churches. It's excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you very much to all of you for participating tonight. It's been an interesting technical journey with Jim coming and going, a sort of dying and rising God, as it were. And also Simon, I asked Simon to do this. He came up with the idea, and I said, I think this would be a great experiment. So Simon's actually been broadcasting from his phone rather than from anything else. And that was just a kind of experiment in technology that it's possible to do these live on airs anywhere, anytime, and people do watch, and this one will get a little bit of promotion, and probably within a few weeks' time it will have had about a congregation of 100. So thank you all very much for participating. If you look, move your mouse sort of a little bit above my head, you'll see a little red telephone button that says leave the call. And so without any further ado, we'll close down for the evening. Have a good night.
Good night.
You.
Thanks, David. Good night.